Okay, this is for our Chapter 3 study guide. This will walk you through the study guide question by question, step by step, and make sure you're ready to earn the A on the first test this week. So let's get started. Number 1, know the order of complexity of systems. Species are the smallest, and species make up a population. Populations make up communities. Communities make up an ecosystem. An ecosystem makes up the biome. So we can see as we go through each of these, we're adding more and more. They're becoming more complex. So you need to know that. There's nothing to answer here. You just need to study it and make sure you know it. Now, it's real easy to look at this and say, oh yeah, I know it. But you really need to know all of these because the question could be asking about any of them. So make sure you study it and put it into your long-term memory, not your short-term memory. Number 2, so which of the following systems listed above, and we're talking about the ones we just looked at here, would include biotic and abiotic factors? So we're looking for living and non-living factors. So ecosystem has both living and non-living things that affect the environment. When I look at an ecosystem, I can see the biotic things such as the animals and the plants and the organisms, but then there's things that affect them. The amount of water will affect the fish. The amount of food is going to affect the other animals. So there's a lot of things here. Well, food, that would be biotic, but the temperature is going to affect the animals, which is abiotic. So it includes both living and non-living items. And we'll talk more about that when we get to number, I think it's number 5, somewhere around there. How would we classify plants ecologically? Now, there is a term, and you guys have been using it really well in class, but there's a couple of us that are still confused. So when you come to this question, the best advice I can give you is, what do you know about plants? Well, we know they automatically make their own food through photosynthesis. And because they automatically create their own food and they're not hunting for food, we call them autotrophs. But there's another word we could use besides autotrophs or autotrophs, and that is primary producers. Either one of those we could use to classify plants ecologically. All right, so autotrophs create their own food. Number 4, how do the nutrients in the ocean compare to nutrients on the land? Are there more or less, and why would this be? So there are limited nutrients in the ocean, and the reason they're called limiting nutrients is because the phytoplankton or the zooplankton, they need certain elements in order for it to start. So that's why they're called limited nutrients. That's going above and beyond. All you need to know is that there are limited nutrients. All right, number 5, compare and contrast food webs and food chains. So food chains show a single feeding relationship in an ecosystem. Food webs show the entire feeding relationship in an ecosystem, and the more complex. Here's a food chain. We can see that the grasshopper is eating the grass, the frog is eating the grasshopper, the snake is eating the frog, and then the hawk is eating the snake, and then the fungi are the decomposers breaking all that stuff back down to release the matter back into the ecosystem. But grasshoppers don't just eat grass, or maybe they do, I don't know. Frogs don't just eat grasshoppers. There's a multitude of things they eat. And by looking at a food web, we can see all the feeding relationships. For example, take a look at this gator. If this was a food chain, we'd only see one item going into the alligator. But a food web shows all the feeding relationships, and we can see the alligator eats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different items there. So it shows all the feeding relationships, not just one. All right, number 6, the amount of living tissue in a given system at each trophic level is called what? Well, the answer is somewhat in the question. So what is the prefix meaning life? And we've talked about this, and it's bio. Measuring the things in grams, we call it not measuring the weight, but we call it measuring the mass. So the answer is biomass. That's the amount of living tissue in a given system at each trophic level. It is biomass. Number 7, when we use the word consumer, we are describing organisms that consume other organisms. What is a synonym for consumers? When we're talking about consumers, there's another word you should automatically be thinking of, and that is heterotroph or heterotroph, either way. All right, number 8, why can matter continuously recycle through the biosphere? And that's because matter cannot be created or destroyed. The law of conservation of matter says it can only be transformed, it can't be destroyed. I'm really waiting on that biotic and abiotic. I really thought that question was on number 5 or 6. It's definitely not on number 9, but it's coming up at some point. What is nitrogen fixation and what organism is best suited to carry this out? You really need to focus on this part. What organism is best suited to carry it out? And bacteria is best suited to carry out nitrogen fixation. But what is nitrogen fixation? That's when the nitrogen in the air is converted to ammonia by bacteria, and this is usually done in soil, and then the plants can gather those nutrients from the soil. But bacteria in soil will do nitrogen fixation. Nutrients and energy flowing through a system are different. How? Okay, so nutrients flow in one direction. That goes up. It goes up the food chain, and when you're going up the food chain or up each trophic level, there's only 10% available at the next level, which we'll talk about on the last question. Nutrients get recycled. They go in multiple directions because the nutrients that get passed out, they get recycled back down. So they go both up and down. So that's how it works. Number 11. What is the difference between a producer, a herbivore, a carnivore, a scavenger, and detritivore and omnivore? Okay, so we got a whole list of things here, and you need to know what they are. So let's start with the producers, the primary producers. They're autotrophs. Think of plants. Now, don't forget about the organisms who do chemosynthesis, though. These are not plants. They don't use sunlight. They use chemicals, which is why it's called chemosynthesis. Those are the producers. Now, the herbivores are what we call the primary consumers. They're the first thing on the food chain eating. They eat the autotrophs. Now, when we talk about herbivores, a lot of people say they eat plants. And I told you from my class, that's not specific enough. I want you to know that the plants that people talk about, what they mean are roots, nuts, fruits, leaves, and seeds. So you need to know that. Then something comes along and eats the carnivore, eats the herbivore, and that would be the carnivore. They're the secondary consumers, and it's not just about eating meat. Scavengers eat meat. Carnivores eat meat, but they're two different categories. And the important thing to remember about carnivores is not that they eat meat, but they hunt and kill the herbivores and then consume them. A scavenger, they don't do any hunting and killing. They may, I guess, technically hunt for dead bodies, but they're going to eat the dead bodies or carcasses of other organisms, and a carcass is just a dead body. Then we have the detritivores. They eat things to release nutrients back into the ecosystem, and you'll notice decomposers missing here. Now, a detritivore, they actually eat things to release nutrients back into the ecosystem, like worms or millipedes. Those are detritivores. Decomposers don't eat things. They release digestive enzymes to break them down. And then the omnivore, they eat both meat and plant matter. They have characteristics of being a carnivore and also a herbivore. And if you know what a herbivore and carnivore is, you can easily describe an omnivore. Omni meaning multi. All right, number 12. What's the difference between biotic and abiotic factors? All right. Finally found it. I knew it was on here somewhere, but it definitely wasn't number 5 or 6. So we have bio, and that just screams the answer. Biotic factors are living factors that affect the ecosystem. So think of the word bio and biotic, but you might be saying herb. We have bio and abiotic as well. Yeah, but the prefix a means not bio, not life, and that is non-living factors that affect the ecosystem. It doesn't mean dead. When we first talked about this, a lot of people are like, oh, it can be dead. No, because if it's dead, it means it was once living, it was once a biotic factor, and that's not the case. Abiotic factors means it was never alive. Air, water, dirt, pollution, temperature, the amount of sunlight. Those are things that they're just non-living. They were never alive. So when you get to abiotic factors, you need to move from the part where you think it's dead. It's not dead. It was never alive to begin with. Number 13, there's an umbrella term that encompasses this entire chapter we've done. We've been studying ecology. And 13, 14, 15 kind of go together. It's just asking the question a little bit differently. The biological term is called what? Ecology, which is the study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their physical surroundings. Now, this definition you don't need to write down. The reason you don't need to write that definition down is when you flip to 15, it's right here. The interactions among organisms and their surroundings is known as what? And that is ecology. Now, we've checked this off here, and you definitely need to know the definition right here, the study of interactions among organisms, which we have right here. You need to know that definition. Remember, this entire test is not multiple choice. Some of it's fill in the blank. some of its short response. So you need to know. And because this is the first test we're taking, you don't really know what to expect just yet. So imagine for a moment we're in a forest. What type of factors would organisms be? Okay, so there's only two types of factors, biotic and abiotic. This is talking about the organisms. It doesn't matter that we're in a forest. This first sentence, that has no bearing on the question whatsoever. It doesn't matter where we are. This is useless information. What we're focusing on is what type of factors would organisms be? We know organisms are alive. Would that be describing biotic or abiotic? And that's describing biotic factors, bio meaning life or living. 17, reviewing the water cycle, what happens before precipitation. Precipitation is also known as rain, and before the rain falls, condensation has to happen. Before condensation, you have evaporation from the ground, ocean, lakes, and streams, transpiration from plants. That means plants give off water, and we'll talk about that when we dive into studying plants later this year. But right before precipitation, this rainfall, the water condenses. It works just like a cold glass of water. When you lay it out, the water vapor inside wherever you are condenses on the outside of the glass and turns into liquid water. The same thing happens as water condenses and then falls as rain. All right, a couple more and we'll be ready. Number 18, what is the ultimate energy source where all the energy on Earth comes from? And a lot of people say plants, and that's true, but the plants have to get their energy from somewhere. It doesn't magically appear, and it comes from the sun. And that sun energy is captured by autotrophs. Number 19, algae blooms happen from time to time. So what's the cause of these algae blooms? Algae blooms don't, magically happen. There's been excess nitrogen that has entered the water, and that has caused these algae blooms to bloom up almost overnight. All right, last one, number 20. So we have a energy pyramid here, and the question is, how much energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next? 10%. Well, what if they give us a set of numbers? We need to know how to use that 10% or calculate 10%. Don't worry, there's no math involved here. There's an easy trick that we're going to go over. So imagine we have 1,700 at the producer level, and we know our primary producers are first. How much is available to the primary consumers? Okay, so we know primary consumers are the first things that eat the primary producer. So it's really asking about, if we have 1,700 at the plant level, how much do the herbivores get? So we know 10%. Well, if we have 1,700, we can move the decimal. Do we move the decimal one place to the left or the right as we move up each level? Well, here you can see we have 100%. Here we have 10. Here we have 1, 0.1, 0.01. That decimal is going one place to the left for each level that we move up. So when I go from my producers to my primary consumers, I just move that decimal one place to the left, and instead of having 100.0, I now have 10.0. When I'm going from the primary consumers to the secondary consumers, I move that decimal one place to the left, and I have 1.0. But the question, it says 1,700 at the producer level. They want a number. That's not a problem. We know here we have 1,700. Going up one level, we move that decimal one place to the left, and we no longer have 1,700, we have 170. So that is everything you need to know for the test. Remember though, this is a guide. It's not an absolute. Make sure you're studying all that vocab. Study hard. Do not review 5 minutes before you come in. That's not studying. That's a recipe for disaster. Make sure you study. Use this video. Use your study guide. Use everything I've given you so you can be successful. You're worth investing in. Even you, third period, because I sent out that message. That was misconstrued that one time. Anyway, your test is this week. Make sure you study. If you have any questions, please text me and let me know, and we'll see you guys in class.